Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Hey everyone, it's Brian, back for another week solo to give you a little bit of a primer on ransomware this week. And we talk about ransomware an awful lot, so I thought it might be good to kind of sit down and talk a little bit about what it is. Again, this is one of those episodes that may be a little basic for a lot of you cybersecurity professionals that listen to us, but could be a good episode for you to maybe share with people who may be not as familiar with it. So I'll start with, what is ransomware? Ransomware is a malicious type of software that goes about encrypting files on a file system in order to make them inaccessible. And the idea with that is to really ask for ransom. It is ransomware. So they're going to encrypt those files to prevent you from accessing them and then ask you to pay to unlock those to be able to open those back up. This is often delivered via a Trojan, which is another term we use as a file that looks like something else, but is actually there to do something nefarious. And then tricking the user into downloading it. Can oftentimes look like, hey, go download this latest version of Photoshop. And, oh, hey, cool, it's free, it's unlocked. I'm going to download it and I'm going to run it on my computer and boom, all my files get encrypted. And like I said, the intention there is to really disrupt. If you're using it against a business, to really disrupt their operations. It could be to gain personal data along with it. It could be to simply just shut somebody down. And then in all those cases, also holding them for ransom. And the reason why I list off a bunch of different things is because sometimes ransomware, we see so much of it that they've actually started using that as a smokescreen in some cases to kind of obfuscate what they're really trying to do. And I like to talk about the fact that, like, if they're getting far enough into your systems that they can go and encrypt all of your data, odds are they're doing something else in there. They may be grabbing that data and exfiltrating it, what we call exfiltrating, taking it out of that environment and into their own so that they've got that ability to do something else with it. We'll talk about what some of that other stuff could be, which could be like a triple extortion, triple ransom type situation. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So like I said, it oftentimes starts with a Trojan attack, but there's a lot of different ways that it could happen. Traditionally, it's kind of how it started, but these days it's more and more about social engineering and getting somebody to click a bad link. So still kind of in that Trojan sense of trying to get them to think they're doing one thing, but actually they're doing something that they really didn't intend. And so all of that spam that we get on our phones through text messages, that we see on social media sites like LinkedIn and Twitter and those types, and of course in our email, which we've been seeing for years, is really looking to get you to click that link and do something and go to that thing and do that thing. Usually they'll use a concept of stress or trying to make it sound really urgent. You've heard Milo and I talk about, watching out for those type of phishing links quite a bit. And so that's an area that you can go back and listen to episodes where we talked about phishing specifically, but ultimately trying to get them to do that thing, to download that file. And like I said, you double click it to execute it, to run what you think is a program, to open up a PDF. There's lots of different ways that it can present itself to your system and then execute and do its thing. In a more business focused scenario, they may be logging into systems, working their way through a bunch of different servers, trying to get into as many systems as possible, and they'll just drop that executable in there. And then at some point, they run a mass command to execute it on a bunch of different systems. So sometimes the initial entry of the attacker comes from these kind of Trojan type approaches, but the actual execution sometimes happens in the back end. Sometimes that initial payload is not the actual ransomware code itself. And then once it executes, you may have seen posts about some of the screens that pop up, but essentially you would sit down at your computer in the morning and you power it on and up comes this message that says, hey, we've locked your entire system. Put this much money into this Bitcoin wallet. This is one of those places where the cryptocurrencies are really providing a good avenue for these criminals is with this scenario. And so that message pops up and you can't do anything with your system because it's completely locked up. And the only thing you could do is get that message. I've seen businesses also get to a situation where they're like, applications will start shutting down and they don't understand what's going on. And they start digging through it. They find out that the data this application relies on is all encrypted, or all of the files that this application is trying to access are now encrypted or unusable in some way. And that's how they discover that they've run into a ransomware. They log into that file server and okay, yeah, it's got that big message sitting up there. And the intention again is really to get you to pay money to then theoretically get a key that or an executable that you can run on that system to then unlock all those files. And honestly, that's sometimes a hit and miss proposition. Sometimes they will send it. There have been ransomware gangs who demand the money and then never turn over that decryption capability. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they'll turn it over and it decrypts 80% of your files, but 20% it just can't undo for some reason. So it's a hit and miss proposition at that point. Once your data's been destroyed, it's really a tough situation to deal with at that point. So let's talk a little bit about who they're targeting. I've kind of alluded to a couple different approaches to it. First off, as individuals, it really did kind of start with individuals. It kind of grew out of the normal, hey, here's an email from a Nigerian prince, and they want you to send that money. And then it started becoming about putting viruses on your system. And then it became about this and that and the other thing. And ransomware is the latest and quite frankly, probably one of the most successful because now there's a true business to be built off of it. And you have legitimate businesses out there about ransomware. And so it's kind of grown past the individuals. Individuals are kind of more of a spray and pray type approach where, send out a bunch of emails. And if one out of the million emails we send off results in us getting $10,000, it was free money because most of the rest of it didn't cost any money whatsoever. So now you're seeing it more focused on businesses. So what businesses? Well, obviously small businesses are getting targeted. Statistics, I think this is from 2024, says 1 in 5 small to medium-sized businesses have suffered a cyber attack and then filed bankruptcy or had to close. So this can have a real impact on those organizations. And I'll talk about some of the downstream effects of it because it's way more than just the amount of money that you would have to pay for the ransom that can go into these. One of the biggest ones these days is one of the most unfortunate, which is healthcare. It used to be that these cyber gangs didn't, they kind of had a code of conduct that said don't hit where physical harm can happen. So healthcare was kind of verboten. They weren't attacking hospitals at all. But that has really changed over the last 5 years. Kind of as we, 2021, 2022, as the healthcare impact of COVID kind of started to lessen and become less of a massive strain, you started to see the criminals start to attack them. And now it is one of the highest rate industries to be hit, depending on which statistics you look at. And one of the statistics I found is, again, I think this is 2024, 2/3 of healthcare organizations were hit by ransomware. So it's very widespread with hospitals getting hit on this kind of stuff. One of the big ones is in the healthcare space is one of the biggest ones globally that we've seen, which was Ascension Health. They run 142 hospitals. And this was back in kind of mid 2024. Ransomware attack took out their electronic health records. And for those of you who aren't familiar with how hospitals run, that is the main application that the doctors are using to take their notes. If you see a computer in that room, it's going to say Epic or Meditech or a bunch of other names that are out there. That is the main record. That is what hospitals run on when it comes to patient care. And so taking that out meant they really couldn't help patients in the way they needed to. It ended up being a really bad situation where, anything that's not emergency kind of has to be set aside. Or you're dealing with old paper records that at some point someone's going to have to type back into that system for the long term. It took them out for 4 weeks. And by their admission, over 5.5 million patient records were contained in there. And again, going back to what I said before, if they got onto the system to encrypt it, odds are they probably grabbed the data while they were there as well. So, the good chance that over millions of us had our data leaked because of that. And some of our most precious data, to me, is healthcare data. It's an area I focus on, and so that's an area I care a lot about, and that's because it really hits at the core of who we are as people. Education is another one similar to healthcare that it was like, let's not disrupt schools, because we all generally can agree that education is important. And so as these gangs have been more about the money and less about the morals. Not that they were ever about the morals, but they've kind of lost all morals when money's involved. We're seeing more and more schools get hit. Um, Definitely see some in the elementary, K-12, secondary levels. But we do see a lot of higher education getting hit as well. I think in 2024, it was 79%, was a statistic I found, of higher education institutions. So your colleges and universities were getting hit. Governments have been a popular one on and off throughout the years. You definitely see ransomware being used as part of nation state fighting. So, China has hacked the US government, and Russia has hacked the UK government, and things like that. But you also see just regular gangs, cyber criminal gangs, attacking governments at all levels. In 2024, 34% of state and local government organizations were hit by ransomware. So they are going after those smaller ones. Of course, when you look at the federal level governments, you're going to see a lot of attacks going directly at them individually. Manufacturing is another big one. They've oftentimes been kind of at the top ranks of the industries that are getting attacked. Finance, retail, we've seen a lot of attacks. Scattered Spider is one that we'll talk about here in a little bit, that has hit a lot of retail companies recently, and trying to hit them. So 2023, the stat I found was about 64% of financial firms were hit. So it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't really matter whether you're a 70-year-old grandmother, or the largest bank in the world, or one of the largest healthcare industries. They're going after everybody. And sometimes it's targeted, sometimes it's random, spray and pray type approach. But it is out there, and it is kind of guaranteed that everyone's at least had an attack attempted against them with ransomware at this point. It's the old adage of it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when at this point. So what are some of the consequences? I talked about the financial aspect of things, which can be, you pay the ransom, and there are costs to recovery. The cost for your people to have to deal with all this, the fact that people aren't able to do stuff at that point in time, like that is lost productivity, which is dollars and cents to most businesses. You may have to pay for a incident response company, or you may have to pay for new servers, or, hey, we're going to recover to the cloud, and now we've got to spin up those resources, and that's going to cost us extra money because now we're running two different environments. Those types of costs come into play. Of course, if decryption isn't possible, if you don't have good backups, which we'll talk about here in a second, you may lose data. For a very simple example, in a retail situation, if they attack your billing system and you hadn't sent out that bill to that customer yet, and you lose that particular data, guess what? You don't know that you have to bill them. And now you've lost money. You've provided that service, provided that item, but the billing process hasn't gone through yet. And so that can be a direct financial loss in that perspective. And of course, every business is a data business. Every business is utilizing whatever data they have to try to make their business better, to win the next deal, whatever that might be. Loss of that data has an indirect impact on the ability for the business to be successful. Of course, there's reputational damage. So you get a colonial pipeline, for example, that goes down for months, weeks, stretching past the month point. That's a reputational damage. Like, are you going to do business with that group again? If I have choice of hospitals and one hospital was down for 4 weeks because of ransomware, do I trust them anymore? Do I trust that retailer to continue to give them my credit card? I may not. And again, Milo and I have talked a lot about who do you trust when you do retail online and things like that. This is one of those things that definitely come into play for me, is to say you got hit by some sort of malware, some sort of attack, whether it be ransomware or not. Do you have the proper controls in place? Do you have what you need to be able to get back up and running and to do business with me in a way that I can trust you? There's also operational downtime. Again, that can lead to, hey, we can't provide a service, therefore we can't make money off of it. It could be the fact that my people are busy trying to deal with this ransomware attack, and instead of trying to build the next widget that we need to go sell. So it pushes back timelines, which of course, time is money for a lot of businesses. That's really the tip of the iceberg. I think of, the costs of a ransomware event as an iceberg. There's some costs that are obvious, that are above the waterline, but below the waterline, there's even more costs. And depending on your business, the industry you're in, those costs could go for a very long time. The reputational damage could potentially last you years before you get back up from that. And the damage that it continues to cause you over and over again may be something you continue to experience long past the recovery point. So now let's talk a little bit about kind of how you can protect yourself. So it's happening to everybody. It's going to happen, all these things. What can I do to slow them down, to potentially stop the next attack? I talked about backups. That's an important aspect. I would say that's one of the easier things to get in place. Getting it right will take some time, but if you don't have backups, then you are dependent on paying the ransom and getting the unlock key, or not paying the ransom, going to law enforcement, and they've got a pile of keys that sometimes will work and sometimes won't work. You're rolling the dice a little bit at that point. But if you make sure that you've got backups, and then of course you want to protect those backups, you want to be able to investigate those backups to make sure that restoring a server, restoring a bunch of files isn't going to reintroduce that malware or reintroduce a backdoor, is going to be important. Making sure that they can't be affected. We are seeing ransomware that goes around into these corporate environments, and they look for specific backup vendors, and they will not do anything until they find those backups and try to destroy those backups. They will try to destroy the backups, age them out, shorten the amount of time that we hold on to them, whatever it takes to get to the point where no matter what you restore, first of all, you may not be able to restore because there are no backups. Secondly, if you are able to restore, you're going to restore the malware because there is no backup that doesn't have the malware. Or I may just make sure that if you have to restore from your backups, you're going to restore the malware because you can't go far enough back. If you go too far back, you lose too much data. So either I'm going to make sure you reintroduce the malware, or I'm going to make sure you're down for even longer while you try to clean the data before actually utilizing it. So having backups in place is the very first thing. Like, I've got backups of all of my photos, and if somebody came by with ransomware and encrypted all those photos, I would probably literally just throw away that storage device that it was on. I would check everywhere around to make sure that it's not floating around anymore, and then I'd pull down my backups for those photos back onto a new or a cleaned up device. Of course, you don't want it to rely on that. You want to stop them before they have. The typical advice is going to play here in almost every scenario. Make sure you've got strong, unique passwords. Do not reuse passwords. If you want to go to the ultimate extreme, don't reuse email addresses or usernames. Have everyone have a unique one that is not predictable, particularly from an algorithm. Don't use some sort of algorithm that's just like, I'm going to use the word hello and the name of the site. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Twitter. That's very predictable. And you don't want to do that. Make sure it's unique. Use a password manager is the easy way to go around that. And stop focusing on having to remember your passwords. Multi-factor authentication is super important. Ideally not with an SMS, ideally with something that's on your phone that you have the unlock keys for, so that if you lose your phone, you can still unlock your multi-factor. SMS is a very easy to break scenario these days, so don't rely on that if you don't have to, which guarantees that even if your username and your password get leaked, you still need to go through that multi-factor authentication in order to get into those systems that are targets for ransomware. Keeping software up to date, therefore there's less bugs, there's less holes for them to go through. It's a typical, you gotta manage your vulnerabilities aspect of things, which we've talked about. being wary of suspicious emails. So again, that phishing awareness, making sure you slow down, make sure you think, hey, is this actually legitimate? Are there signs in here that I should be cautious about? And of course, having some sort of antivirus, anti-malware, EDR, XDR type tools in your environment, whether that be at home or at work, to detect these things and ideally stop them as they try to execute. Obviously, nothing's perfect. All of these are important, including the backups, to be able to do that. If it does break out, and it does happen, first thing you want to do is try to isolate that system. There's a lot of it depends in here. Sometimes if it's massive breakout, sometimes it's better to just let it sit for a little while and observe and figure out what they're doing, what they're trying to get to, while trying to protect the systems that you know that they're trying to get to. But be ready to shut the whole thing down, whether that's kill your internet connection, whether it's taking a server off of the network, whether it's shutting down a system. I'm not going to get into the advice of all of those because different people have different advice there. But really, you want to make sure that it can't spread is the important thing. The other piece of advice that I can't really give because it's very situational and everybody has kind of a different approach to it. But the general consensus is that you just don't pay the ransom. If they can't make money, then they have no reason to continue doing this type of thing. Obviously, enough people are paying the ransom at this point that it continues to happen. But this is where you definitely want to work with law enforcement, with insurance, with whoever your incident response team may be. If you're an individual dealing with this, you really have to think, is it worth encouraging this kind of criminal behavior to get this thing back, whatever that thing might be? Always report it to the authorities. They track these things. This is how we get these types of statistics. This is how they're able to put together a profile of a given ransomware gang. And of course, work with your CrowdStrikes and those other security vendors that you're working with. They do the same thing. They collect that information. They do investigations. There's a lot of really good intel that comes out of private businesses as well as from public authorities. And then finally, once you've got it down to the point where you think you've cleaned it up or you've shut down the systems that are affected and it's not running around your environment anymore, start restoring your backups. Ideally to a clean system in a way, maybe offline if possible, so that you can check it before you put it back with the rest of your stuff. But at that point, you should be able to get your data back up if you've got those good backups. Okay, next I want to talk a little bit about some of the gangs, some of the names you may hear out there. This is not exhaustive because there's an exhaustive list of them, or I should say an exhausting list of attackers out there, of which we won't be able to cover in any podcast format. You could do a whole podcast doing nothing but covering these because there's going to be more pop up faster than you can deal with them. So I'll go through a few of the notable ones. The first one is Clop, and this is not with an O, but with a 0 because it's leaked that way. They're kind of known for exploiting vulnerabilities like the Move It transfer. So Move It was a file transfer tool that they were able to actually get themselves embedded in and utilize this tool to move data out of customers' environments. They do focus on large-scale data theft and extortion, so they're going out there to not only encrypt those files to ransom you to be able to get them unlocked, but they're also going to exfiltrate. They're going to take that data and they're potentially going to extort you with leaking that data as well, which we call double extortion. It's pay us to unlock it, pay us to not put it out on the dark web. We'll talk in a little bit about a triple extortion. Could be a lot of different things. There's actually X number of extortion schemes out there. Black Basta is another one that may have been heard by people on the regular news media, like you get outside of the cybersecurity IT news. Black Basta is the one behind the Ascension Health attack that I talked about before. They do that double extortion as well by encrypting and stealing data. Of course, with Ascension Health, that's some really sensitive data. So it was the type of data that is ripe for the multi extortion type approach to things. DarkSide is another one. I mentioned Colonial Pipeline. They were the ones behind that Colonial Pipeline, or I should say they're attributed to it. The attribution of who did an attack is a little bit art, a little bit science. It's never 100%. Unless they actually take credit for it. And even then you question it sometimes. Sometimes one gang will pretend to be another gang and take credit for it, thus kind of pointing in the wrong direction on things. So DarkSide is targeting a lot of large corporations. They're they're probably doing less of the spray and pray approach to things and more of the really targeted approach to things. One thing that they really do is they've built a ransomware as a service. So I talked about this being a business. They essentially have ransomware tools and infrastructure, and I don't know if they're one of the ones that have it, but there are other ransomware as a service companies, if you will, that actually have helplines for the people that want to go and, hey, I know a way to get into this business. I'm going to work with a company like DarkSide to use their tools, to use their help desk, potentially the payment processing aspect of things. Like everything that a normal business would do, you could probably do on the dark web for ransomware. Next up is Lockbit. This is one that is by far one of the most notorious ones, most well-noted ones that do ransomware as a service. And they're kind of known for being really, really quick, helping with the double extortion, which oftentimes will turn into triple or quadruple extortion if, hey, pay us to unlock it, pay us to not put it on the dark web, pay us not to go to your customers and tell them you were the ones that did it. Go to that customer, say, hey, I got your data through this particular company, and now you pay me to not release your individual records out there. So they're asking for extortions anywhere they can sometimes. Lockbit uses a lot of 0 days, unpatched vulnerabilities. They're less focused on that social engineering aspect of things and more about using exploits, just kind of breaking in. The final one I'll talk about is Scattered Spider. This one's been in the news a ton in kind of the first half of 2025 into the summer of 2025. Very financially motivated. They are here to make money, and that's what they are doing. They kind of have gotten known to target help desks and IT support to try to get that initial access. So whether that be through phishing campaigns, whether they're calling up and trying to social engineer their way through the organization, they do a lot of SIM swapping to get through the multi-factor authentication side of things, all of it just to gain access to a corporate network. And then once they're in, they've got all sorts of techniques that they use to hide, to expand, to dump their payloads before they actually execute on them. So again, there's a lot of them out there that use a lot of different techniques. It's a fascinating study on all the ways that they can do that. And sometimes I'll just go down the rabbit hole of, hey, this new one's out there. Let's go see what they're doing. And can be a lot of fun to just kind of understand what's going on. And honestly, I feel makes me better at being able to understand how to defend against it. Finally, what I kind of want to touch on is some real world examples and kind of what the effects were. I talked about Ascension Health within the hospital type of setting that, was super impactful, was related to Black Basta, as I talked about. And of course, there was Colonial Pipeline, which I talked about. They were asking for a multi-million-dollar ransom. DarkSide was involved in that one and shut down the oil and gas pipelines across the U.S. while they were trying to fix this situation. And of course, the downstream effects of that were not just felt by Colonial Pipeline, but by a lot of people in the southern half of the United States, particularly with oil shortages and, that causing the rise of prices. And there were some panic buying, which caused even higher prices and became very tumultuous environment with which to buy fuel for a number of months before it finally completely settled down. The city of Baltimore is an example of a local government that got hit. This was back in 2019 and it cost the city millions of dollars just in recovery. So lots of services like being able to collect taxes, to be able to do like DMV vehicle registration, driver's licenses, even affected emergency dispatch. So being able to send out the firefighters and the police, obviously not a good situation for a local government in that regard. From a university's perspective, Munster Technical University in Ireland got hit from a more K-12. The Toronto District School Board was hit as well. I think those both happened in 2023. It essentially shut down their ability to teach. So online learning has become so much more important. Technology is so much more important. Most school districts are providing some sort of device to a lot of kids these days. Of course, that if that all gets shut down, then education kind of comes down too. Finally, to talk about a company that is in the middle of helping with cybersecurity is Rackspace, the hosting provider. They got hit with Clop. The Clop ransomware gang claims to have breached their services, exfiltrated sensitive data. I don't know that they were really down too much, if I remember right. Probably recovered quickly if there was any impact on that front. But again, a sign that even companies that are doing technology for their business that are in the middle of it are vulnerable here. So little bit of information about ransomware. Hopefully this is useful. Obviously, some of you, this could be very repetitive and things that you already know. But for us, with socializing security, for Milo and I, these are episodes that we encourage you to share with people. And it's a way for us to kind of expand our listenership, our viewership. If you're on YouTube, share that. If you're listening to podcasts, share the link to our site or just share the file, whatever's convenient there. Obviously, a lot of platforms like Spotify allow you to share directly there as well. It's a good way to help us get the word out, which we really appreciate. And hopefully this helps others to kind of understand what ransomware is, why it's such a big deal, and why it's important to do things like have a password manager, use that multi-factor authentication, and not just rely on, I'm going to use the same password everywhere. So really appreciate you joining me for this, listening in to me rant for about half an hour, but we really appreciate all of you listening, and we look forward to talking to you on the next one. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.